This program is brought to you with support from the U.S. EPA. We're here to present the EFC Network podcast. The Environmental Finance Center Network is a partnership of 12 centers serving 10 EPA regions. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems. This podcast series has been designed to help system personnel improve technical, managerial, and financial capacity of the utilities and communities they serve.
Welcome to this episode of the Environmental Finance Center Network podcast. My name is Bailey Vieira, and I'm a program manager at the Wichita State University Environmental Finance Center. Today, we will be discussing why emergency response planning is necessary and the 3 areas of emergency response that your utility can begin to brainstorm to jumpstart your emergency response planning efforts. Large-scale disasters, both natural and man-made, can cause significant disruptions to water services. The best way to prepare is to first expect the unexpected, analyze and inventory critical risks, and second, to develop an emergency response plan. Planning in advance helps ensure that when an emergency occurs, everyone knows what to do, including customers. An emergency response plan, or ERP, describes your utility's strategies, resources, plans, and procedures to prepare for and respond to an incident, again, both natural or man-made, that threatens life, property, or environmental resources. Today, I will step you through what to start thinking about and include in your ERP for each of these areas. Keep in mind, the EPA has a variety of tools and guidance to support drinking water and wastewater utility preparedness and response. Check out epa.gov/water utility response for more information and resources. The Environmental Finance Center Network also has technical assistance available for water treatment facilities who serve less than 10,000 people and wastewater treatment facilities with a flow rate of less than 1 million gallons per day. This assistance is free. If you're interested in working with the EFCN to develop an emergency response plan for your facility, please contact us at efcnetwork.org/get-help. Okay, let's jump in. Developing an emergency response plan for your utility can feel like a daunting task, but there are just 3 areas utilities can brainstorm first that will help you shape your entire plan: redundancy, logistics, and communication. Redundancy is the ability to utilize backup systems for critical parts of the system that fail. It is extremely important, as I'm sure you know, to consider in the development of a process or plan for emergency response and recovery. At a minimum, emergency response planners should consider designing redundancy into the system in several areas: equipment and supplies, personnel, communications, and control centers. Redundant equipment could be as straightforward as retaining spare parts, or it could include diverting an entire process to a redundant system altogether. Redundant personnel looks like making sure operators are cross-trained to ensure tasks can be carried out in the event staff are unavailable. Redundant communications could include the use of radios should a cell tower become unavailable or computers are no longer accessible. Redundant control centers looks like having SCADA available in remote locations. Even if that's an app on a cell phone, it could make all the difference in an emergency. Redundant power is a primary issue and a really good place to start to kick off conversations about redundancy. And here's a quick tip. There is often this looming, where do we even start feeling when planning for emergency response? That's okay. Just pick a place to start, like emergency power, and start chatting about emergency power, and all of the other challenges and scenarios will start to surface, kind of like going down a rabbit hole. Capture all of these thoughts with a dedicated note taker or by writing them down on a sticky note and putting all of those sticky notes onto a whiteboard. From there, you can better organize your thoughts and shape necessary components of your plan. You can also keep track of scenarios that need to be prepared for that you might want to think about in the future. The second area utilities can start to brainstorm that will help shape your entire plan is logistics. Emergency response is a complex operation. There are a lot of moving parts in a simple response, and in the case of a total disaster, there will likely be multiple incidents being addressed simultaneously. For these reasons, it is important to think about and identify the people, facilities, and equipment required to respond. Let's start with your people. You will want to identify emergency response roles within your utility. In a standard incident command structure, there is an incident commander, public information officer, safety officer, then an operations section, planning section, logistics section, and finance or administration section. An incident command system structure is usually applied to the local emergency planning level. It's usually applied at the local emergency planning level, and the utility fits within the system in the logistics section. And I know that that can sound a little confusing, but the incident command system structure that's applied at the local level usually includes your county, your city, and other partners like hospitals, emergency response, that all come together in a larger structure. However, at your utility, you can apply the same structure or organization model to your existing staff to mimic this emergency response structure that's proven to be efficient for building an emergency response team. The facility superintendent or your water treatment director or wastewater treatment superintendent is going to be the emergency response lead. But because the superintendent is part of the larger local incident command system, that superintendent will likely be located off-site at that regional incident command center, supporting the regional incident command system structure. Your information officer is someone who is in charge of communicating updates from the field to the lead, who again is likely at that incident command center. So that information officer is going to be critical for communicating what's going on at the utility with the representative, likely your superintendent, who is with that local or regional team. So you really want to choose an information officer to put in this role who's familiar with the utility and can communicate the happenings at the utility in the jargon and framework that that superintendent is accustomed to. Next is a safety officer, and this is someone who monitors incident operations and advises the lead on all matters relating to operational safety, including the health of the community and safety of incident personnel. Jumping into the operations section, now this is your problem solver. This person or group establishes strategy and specific tactics to complete the response objectives. The logistics section is the person or group who supports operations by ensuring supplies, equipment, and personnel are available as needed to meet the response objectives. The planning section coordinates support activities for emergency response planning, including contingency plans and long-range plans. But during an event, this person or group helps process incoming information and helps coordinate activities across the response. So your planning section is really going to be receiving that information, those communications that are coming from the field, and helping your operations section, your problem solvers, who are establishing tactics to complete addressing these various incidents. The planning section is receiving the information, providing it to your operations section, and assisting them in coordinating the activities that need to occur. And then finally, the admin or finance section supports the superintendent and operations with administrative issues. This could be related to supplies or technical issues. And then they're also tracking and processing incident expenses, maintaining licensure and regulatory compliance, and doing the financial accounting. A lot of times at the end of an emergency or a natural disaster, you are reporting a lot of financial costs to either FEMA or some other organization. So it's really important that your finance section is tracking these costs and doing really diligent accounting during the course of an emergency. After establishing your ERP team and assigning roles, you will want to identify and prepare a location where your response team will meet and work in the event of an emergency. This emergency response center will act as a hub for all incoming information, outgoing communication, and decision making. When selecting a location, you need to consider the vicinity to operations, resources, power, and also consider safety. The last component to consider for brainstorming logistics is equipment. We've talked about redundant equipment, but think about the equipment required to prepare the emergency response center. You'll want to prepare the emergency response center location with laptops, a backup power source, radios, safety and triage supplies, and office supplies, including things as simple as notepads, pens, a whiteboard, markers. You'll want to have this center set up and on standby at all times. Consider a cabinet in your emergency response center to house all of this equipment and lock it so it doesn't get pilfered between emergencies. In addition to the equipment I just identified, to support the emergency response center, consider other equipment as well that will be critical to have on hand during an emergency. This could be in respect to keeping your facility operational, but also, again, those triage supplies for employees at various locations, easily accessible, and even emergency water storage. When disaster strikes, communicating the issues and their consequences to your customers and response partners is crucial. Because communities depend on well-functioning water systems, this is especially true for water and wastewater utilities, but I don't need to tell you that. So it's necessary to think about how information will travel from the field to the emergency response center, how information will be conveyed to the local emergency response incident command system, how the utility will relay critical information to customers, and then what backup systems will be in place in case power is down. So the third and final area utilities can brainstorm when beginning to develop an emergency response plan is communication. So let's dive in. How will communication be conveyed? Internal communication and external communication may require different strategies. Internal communication likely includes using a work order system to track response objectives, asking your team what strategies they believe are best is going to be really the most inclusive way to develop a process, a standard operating procedure for this. So do you have a work order system in place today? Would it be would it be advantageous to use that same work order system in the event of an emergency, or is there an alternative system that would be better for your utility? And work order systems require computers, tablets, or cell phones. So it's also important to discuss and develop a pen and paper system that would work best for your utility should power be an issue. Internal communication modes also need to be established and will likely be different given power availability. So lots of utilities already communicate via radio, but some use chat apps, some use Microsoft Teams on tablets, and these all require technology and power. So again, make sure to outline specific processes for varying situations. External communication strategies and modes also need to be established. In an emergency, keeping the public informed about water is paramount. There are lots of ways a utility can disseminate information to their customers, including social media. So Facebook has a safety check feature, and it allows users who are located within a certain distance of a natural disaster to log in and tell friends that they're okay, and to check and see if their loved ones have verified their safety as well. And then Google has a crisis response resource page that provides tools, information, interactive platforms for emergency responders and those in need of assistance. It includes a variety of support apps like Google Public Alerts, a crisis map, docs and spreadsheets. Each has their own special application and usage to assist for communication, but you would really want to be familiar or to familiarize yourself with both of these social media tools if you're going to utilize them in your emergency response. And that really means taking a look at who your customer is and if they're plugged into these, to Facebook or Google, and if they're using these tools already. Another external communication strategy is mobile apps. So we know cell phone apps, there's an app for everything, and they're a great tool to communicate with customers too. Nextdoor is used by a lot of communities, and this is a great way to disseminate information and mass notifications, but it's important that the utility establish an app as a communication channel well before a disaster. And that allows customers time to download the app, set up accounts, and learn how to navigate the app to get to the information that they want well before a disaster occurs. So selecting one of these apps and then advertising that should an emergency occur or should there be an issue with your water, this is where you need to look to get the latest, greatest information. Cell phones are also a great option. Mobile networks, though, can quickly become overloaded due to the massive increase of users after a disaster. So instead of calling, consider text messaging and emails as communications, as communication methods, because they can work on a parallel platform to cell phones. There are a lot of platforms available to push information to customers. A mass notification system such as Civic Plus allows utilities to automate text messages. So during an emergency, if you had an update that you wanted to push out to all of your customers, you could develop the message in the Civic Plus platform and then schedule that message to go out. But again, it's important to establish these systems sooner rather than later because customers will need to opt into alerts. These alerts can also be sent via recorded message to a landline phone, making it nice for customers who don't have a cell phone. But again, I would caution utilities to send recorded messages to cell phones given network availability during or following a disaster. Okay, so all of those communication methods I just mentioned are great if power, internet, and access to these electronic devices are still available. But what happens when they're not? This next list is items that can be used without power, electricity, Wi-Fi access, et cetera, et cetera. And that's satellite phones, two-way radios, citizens band radios or CB radios, amateur radio or ham radio, police scanners, and word of mouth. So spend some time discussing which of these are best for your utility based on your customer base and what role they could play in your communication plan, should power become an issue. So to summarize communication, just during a disaster, it is important to have a plan in place beforehand and practice that plan prior to a disaster occurring. Discussing the answers to these 5 questions will help you best prepare a communication plan to support emergency response. Those questions are, how will information travel from the field to the emergency response center? How will response objectives be captured and communicated? How will information be conveyed from the utility to the local emergency response incident command system? How will the utility relay critical information to customers? And what backup systems will be in place in case power is down? There are a lot of things your utility can do to begin tackling an ERP for your utility. Brainstorming these 3 areas that we just talked about, redundancy, logistics, and communication, are a great start. But there are several other immediate steps your utility can take to prepare as well, including something as informal as a roundtable to brainstorm the high-level considerations that we just talked about, or more formal steps like conducting a risk and resilience assessment, identifying state regulatory requirements for ERPs, identifying and integrating local plans. So doing a review of the local incident command system and how that might fold in, or how the utility might fold in to that local emergency incident command system. You might want to coordinate with local emergency planning committees and response partners to see what work has already been completed. You could define emergency response roles and incident command system roles, and then start brainstorming from there. Set up your command center, and then also sign up for FEMA Incident Command System training. I highly recommend that any of the individuals in those emergency response roles that we discussed take some type of FEMA ICS training to get an idea of what is expected in some of the processes that are common in emergency response. Brainstorming what your utility will do in case of an emergency will help identify vulnerabilities, address gaps in redundancy and personnel. Having an ERP and practicing the outlined procedures will best prepare staff for unexpected disasters, ultimately mitigating the disruption of the critical services you provide your customers. And don't forget, you can contact the Environmental Finance Center network and request technical assistance to help you get started. Services are free to small systems. I hope this information was helpful. Please contact us with questions or to request technical assistance at efcnetwork.org/get-help. Thank you.
Thank you to all our listeners for tuning into this episode of the EFC Network Podcast, brought to you with support from the U.S. EPA. Be sure to stay tuned for future EFC Network podcast episodes.